Good afternoon, everyone. I am Matt Clark with Veritas CFO, and today we are reviewing some of the first quarter 2020 financial and operating key performance indicators of some publicly traded truckload carriers, USA Truck, US Express, and Covenant Transport. We'll also review some metrics for their brokerage divisions. On the truckload side, USA Truck reported base revenue per loaded mile of $2.09 in the first quarter of this year versus $2.24 in the first quarter of last year, a drop of 15 cents driven by overcapacity in the market, which reduced rates. Also contributing to the decrease was that they had more freight secured in the spot market this year versus contract freight. US Express reported average revenue per loaded mile of $2.07 in the first quarter of 2020 versus $2.13 in the first quarter of 2019. The main driver of the decrease also due to pressure on rates driven by excess capacity in the market. The company also reported that only 4% of its customers were closed in the quarter due to COVID-19. And Covenant Transport reported average revenue per loaded mile of $2.02 in the first quarter of this year versus $2.10 in the first quarter of last year, driven by lower rates and a 1% increase in miles driven. Covenant also reported that two of its large automotive customers shut down operations in mid-March due to the virus. For base revenue per tractor per week, USA Truck reported $3,223 in the first quarter of this year versus $3,375 in the first quarter last year, the decrease driven by the drop in base revenue per loaded mile. US Express reported $3,713 in the first quarter this year versus $3,762 in the first quarter last year, driven by a decrease in its over-the-road segment, partially offset by an increase in its dedicated segment. And Covenant Transport actually reported an increase to $3,782 in the first quarter this year versus $3,724 in the first quarter last year, driven by an increase in the number of miles driven, partially offset by a lower rate per mile. On the operating ratio, USA Truck reported an OR of 101.8% in its trucking segment in the first quarter this year versus an OR of 98.3% in the first quarter of last year, driven by the lower revenue from reduced rates. US Express reported an OR of 99.7% in the first quarter this year versus 97.3% in the first quarter last year, driven by the drop in revenue in its over-the-road segment. And Covenant Transport reported an OR for the truckload segment of 101.8% in the first quarter of this year versus 99.3% in the first quarter last year, driven by lower revenue and a 4-cent increase in its operating cost per mile. For deadhead percent, USA Truck reported a slight drop from 13.4% in the first quarter last year to 13.2% in the first quarter this year, and Covenant reported a deadhead percent of 9.2% first quarter this year versus 10% in the first quarter last year. US Express didn't report their percent deadhead. On the brokerage side, USA Truck reported a gross margin percent of 11.1% in the first quarter of this year versus 18.5% in the first quarter last year, driven by a 12.3% decrease in revenue per load. US Express reported a gross margin percent of 3.7% in the first quarter this year versus 17.5% in the first quarter last year, mainly due to a $207 drop in revenue per load. Covenant didn't report their brokerage margin rate in the first quarter of this year. On revenue per load for brokerage, USA Truck reported $1,317 per load in the first quarter this year versus $1,502 in the first quarter of 2019 due to a tougher rate market, and US Express reported revenue per load of $1,161 in the first quarter of this year versus $1,367 in the first quarter of last year, also due to the tougher rate market. Covenant also didn't report their revenue per load. One last note, to be clear, our comments are not intended as a recommendation to buy or sell any securities of these companies. We hope this is helpful to you, and please let us know your comments and feedback below.